relationships or marriage. In even more countries, they face social discrimination in their schools, workplaces, sometimes even at home. This includes children, and the discrimination they experience early in their lives can have long-term impacts on their well-being and personal growth. Parents and family members often find it difficult to accept the LGBTQI+ identities of their children or siblings. All parents want what's best for their children, but every society has deeply ingrained attitudes and sometimes biases that influence the idea of what exactly is best. For many LGBTQI+ youth, breaking the news to their family is the scariest part of coming out. Yet, research shows that queer adolescents who are supported by their families grow up happier and healthier adults. This is why I'm so grateful that everyone is joining for today's Beyond the Binary discussion. Today, we have two speakers, Dr. Annalise Singh and Mr. Shanto Bakshi, and I believe he may be accompanied by a special guest as well, who will share their expertise and personal experiences in supporting inclusion in the family. Of course, this program on LGBTQI+ inclusion is being organized by the US Diplomatic Mission in India for Indian audiences. And I would think that at least some of you in the audience might be wondering if the US government is working to promote queer inclusion at home. I'm very proud to report that yes, we are. President Joe Biden committed to being a champion for queer people every day in the White House, and that commitment has been met with action. To cite just two examples, in June, the US Department of Education issued a notice of interpretation that a law called Title IX, a law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in education, also prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Also in June, the White House announced that the US Department of State, my employer, will begin the process of including a non-binary gender marker on US passports. This is a policy that will impact millions of individuals in the US, including an estimated 1.2 million non-binary adults, 2 million transgender people, and as many as 5.5 million people who were born intersex. There's a lot of work left to do in creating societies that fully live up to our highest ideals of democracy. Achieving inclusion requires all of us to play a part, and it starts with understanding the challenges that LGBTQI+ people experience, which is exactly why we're here today. I'd like to thank the panelists for bringing their knowledge and expertise to this discussion, and I want to thank again you, the viewers, for joining us. Finally, I want to thank my colleague and friend Nick Novak, the Mumbai Consulate's spokesperson, for volunteering to bring his incredible talent as the moderator today. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, you. No pressure. Good evening. My name is Nick Novak, and I am joining you live from Mumbai. Very honored to be your host for the next hour or so as we talk beyond the binary, embracing LGBTQI+ in the family. This is the third event of our LGBTQI+ program campaign, and I encourage you all to visit our Facebook page for more details on the previous two and upcoming events as well. Today, though, our focus is on educating and enlightening families to be open to accepting alternative sexualities and gender identities, and discussing how to provide a support system for their LGBT+ children to feel safe and secure. This is a session for parents and young people alike. It's a safe space. We encourage candor and acceptance and no judgments, so please relax and be at home. We have three people with us live today, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. First, a couple of notes on how we're going to proceed. We'll start with a presentation from the distinguished professor, Dr. Annalise Singh from Tulane University, home of the Green Wave, I think. Then we'll move from the academic to the personal as our panelists share their stories, and we'll hear from several others who we recently featured in our Pride Month campaign on coming out stories. Then after our conversation, we'll open it up to questions from you, our audience. Please write your questions in the chat. We'll curate them throughout. I also want to note that I may use the colloquial LGBT as shorthand throughout for ease of use. I ask for your acceptance and indulgence. I also want to be super clear on that same note at the beginning that I am personally not an expert on any of this. I come to this evening from a place of curiosity and genuine interest. I'm here to learn along with all of you. These are tough subjects and difficult conversations, but they're worth having. And I hope this evening gives you some strategies and ideas on how to have your own versions of these conversations down the road. So now let's move beyond the binary, and I'll introduce our first featured guest, Dr. Annalise Singh. Dr. Annalise Singh is a professor and vice provost for diversity at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. It's in the southern United States, and it's very hot there right now. She is the founder of the Trans Resilience Project, the author of the Queer and Transgender Resilience Workbook. Dr. Singh works with private organizations to deliver training and lectures on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as one-on-one mentoring. And I'll turn things over to Dr. Singh now. Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Yoon, and welcome, community. It's so wonderful to be with you. Good evening. I think we're going to have a really important and meaningful time together. I'm so excited to have a conversation after I share a little bit of content, like what's the context for this conversation Nick just introduced. And I'm really excited for the conversation with Mr. Boxey and a surprise guest. So I'll just say that today is such a meaningful event for me personally. I think you will see why. So when I say I'm grateful to be here, I actually mean that from the bottom of my heart. Namaste, Sat Sri Akal, just welcome to everyone in this community. I think for so long, I've kind of worked on South Asian American kind of counseling and psychology with LGBTQIA plus people in the United States. So to collaborate with India this evening is very, very meaningful. I think when we talk about LGBTQIA plus communities, I think it's really important to slow down and kind of ask ourselves, like, why? Why are we here? I mean, I hope you're tweeting your friends and Facebooking and telling people, TikToking, telling them to join us this morning because the conversation is going to be real. But for me, the reason I showed up this morning is because I love my wife, my spouse. She's on the left. That's where we got married. My family in Delhi, you'll see a picture of just a few of them on the right, have been so instrumental in family acceptance for me, both of my Indian family that lives in India and in the United States. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to a dear friend, Jayati, who I got to meet through the International Visitors Leadership Program. So for you, I want you to think right now, you know, you could be anywhere, but maybe you're showing up for yourself. Maybe you're showing up for your child. But I think that why is so important, because when we are moving through a world where there is not family acceptance, where there is societal oppression, our why is usually deep in our heart, right? And so I want to welcome you back to your why. I want to tell you a little bit about what I do. I am a researcher. I'm a scientist. I study the resilience of queer and trans people. That's the language we use in the United States. So, and we follow cohorts of people. We've been following one specific cohort of transgender people since 2014, 330 people. And the things we find about people's lives, you know, our youngest participant is 16, our oldest is 89. And the things they report are very similar in terms of the impact of a lack of family acceptance on their lives. And so we'll talk about that today. But I think as a researcher, as a professor, you know, I've written a lot of articles, I've published a lot in journals, but there was a moment in my own life as a queer person myself, as someone who does this work, I've done this research for about 20 years. I was like, something's not working. We can put this research in journal articles where no one can read them, or we can take, you know, I took kind of the overarching findings of my work and wrote the Queer and Trans Resilience Workbook to really help LGBTQIA plus people and their families really move into that acceptance. Now I'm going to bring you back to your why. So I'm going to share my why a little more deeply with you because I think so many of our stories and our journeys around self and family acceptance come back to like the core of who we are, right? And what we stand for in our lives. And I think for me, you know, it really goes back to my parents, the messages I learned. My dad was actually born in Rawalpindi pre-partition. and he met my mom in the United States, in Louisiana, right here in New Orleans, where I live right now. And I think one of the things that they did for me is they told me I could be whoever I wanted to be. And I think they were experiencing quite a bit of racism in the United States as an interracial couple. But I think even though they weren't able to talk about, hey, Annalise, like, it's totally awesome if you're LGBTQ, right? They weren't able to say those words, but I think, as I moved into my adolescence, I had, I just benefited from family support and acceptance. I want you to think about, if you're a family member, how you show that love and acceptance to your LGBTQIA plus child. And if you are LGBTQ yourself, like, what is the best way for you? How do you know your family is giving you that strong base of family acceptance so you can thrive? I can tell you, without this strong base, it's just true that, adolescents, when we're exploring our genders and sexualities, if we don't have that family acceptance, guess where we explore it? Out in the world. And that's what happened to me in the United States. Even though my family was accepting, there were certain words they hadn't learned to put in their mouths yet, right? And so I went exploring who I was in places that weren't ideal, like bars, because when I was in the bar, I could be with my community. I could be in a safer space. But in that space, there was also alcohol, drugs. There were all these things that you wouldn't have found in my family, right? And so I think I share this part of my story, not because it's comfortable to talk about. I actually feel very fortunate that I survived my teenage years without developing an addiction. But one of the things I can tell you is, even though my parents told me, you can do whatever you want to do, Annalise, we love and support you from here to the moon and back. They also didn't know I was going through a significant amount of depression. I had a suicide attempt because I felt like, well, there was something wrong with me. And I didn't talk to my parents about that. Again, keep in mind where I was coming out, where I was cluing into who I was. It was in the bar. It was outside of the family. As soon as I started talking about those issues to my family, I started, my dad started talking to me about his growing up stories, and how he talked to me about the transgender people of India and like what they had experienced pre and during colonization and post-colonization. He started talking to me about his friends, his colleagues that he grew up with. And we started having this kind of intergenerational conversation that really led to a lot of my research, which is, how did we get to this place? I know so much of LGBTQIA plus advocacy starts with words, definitions, like we have tough lives, others, cisgender and straight people who aren't LGBTQ, they need to do better. That's usually where our education and our advocacy initiatives start. But I would posit that we need to start in a different place. I think we have to look pre-colonization and look at the impacts on our communities, right? There's a reason my Indian family says, don't go outside, your skin will get too dark, right? That didn't come from India, that came from the British. Okay, I just said that, right? I just said that. But my point is, there's so many examples, and on every single continent, in every single country in the whole world, that has a history of LGBTQI plus communities. And the only thing they share in terms of when those communities become bad is colonization. So just let's take that in and realize that, wow, it's for all of us. We think we're advocating for LGBTQI plus people, and we are in today's webinar, in this conversation today. But I think when we have this conversation, it's for everyone who also isn't LGBTQIA+. What were you taught about your own gender and sexuality, even if you're not LGBTQ, right? What were you taught that actually doesn't help you? Isn't it weird to think that some of that comes from colonization and these tight boxes of what it means to perform and be our genders? Now, one of the things we want to talk about when we don't have family acceptance, the bad news is that your child is moving through the world with a lot of stress that's additive. It's there's the general stress of getting out of bed. Let's just be honest, especially in a pandemic time. But then LGBTQIA plus stress is on top of that, right? We'll talk about that. It's squishing down that everyday resilience. And then it's chronic. So you may be accepting of your child, but then when your child moves out into the world, we know what people could experience. So we need you even more, right? Because those systems of stress are everywhere in schools, in religious settings, in communities. And the worst news from a trauma perspective is that they're socially based, which means we experience this trauma, this stress in relationship where we should feel safety and affirmation, right? And then we're not even sure how to anticipate these things, right? They can be very chaotic, prejudice. And so we're kind of like on alert all the time. And that can mimic a trauma space, right? And we look at a cycle of socialization, what we know is that we're kind of bombarded by messages all the time from the moment we're born about what it means to be a boy, a girl, what it means to get married, right? And those messages are enforced through families, through religious institutions, through schools, through laws, right? And so that can result in really a lot of dissonance. And we, I think, as family members, as LGBTQIA community, we have a choice. We can stay in that cycle of socialization, become self-hating, kind of perpetuate that cycle of discrimination, or we can pop out of that cycle of socialization and make a deep change. And this is why it's so important to make this change. Look again at the influence of family on the lives of LGBTQIA plus people. Look how big that influence is way before we go out into the community workplace and develop other individual relationships as adults, right? And so when you kind of start kind of going against that minority stress, you're starting to help your children deal with things like bullying. In the United States, we've got a problem. I'm glad Nick and Yoon were talking about how we're working on our own challenges. But when in the United States, we have similar research to India. You know, some of the most unhealthy minority stress our community experiences is in the schools where people should be safe, right? Many of our transgender young people, right? You can see the rates in the United States have a 1 in 12 chance of being murdered, right? Some of the research around the globe says that about 40 to 50% of people who identify as transgender will attempt suicide at least one time in their lifetime. At least one time, 40%. What does that mean about us as a society and our humanity, right? They're not attempting suicide because you know, out of nowhere. They're doing that because the minority stress is getting to be too much. And so I wanted to share a few images with you. When you think about the trauma that your LGBTQIA plus child experiences, and to those who are adults in our community, it can be shattering, right? But we do have resilience that helps us like move against that discrimination. We do have a way that we resist. But there's this societal laws, the lack of family acceptance, that oppression kind of weighs down on our natural resilience, right? And so you can think about resilience as this ordinary magic that families can really support with LGBTQIA plus folks. It's like, hey, when you wake up out of bed, sometimes it's going to feel hard to get out of bed. Like it's a revolutionary act. But once you tap into that LGBTQIA plus resilience, it's like an unlimited resource of affirmation. And so I wanted to share in San Francisco, California, we have the Family Acceptance Project. And one of the things that we know when there's a lack of family acceptance is that we see depression, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts go up 8 times. When there's not family acceptance, that those thoughts go up 8 times Drug use goes up 3 times. HIV and STI risk goes up 3 times, right? And those behaviors that are family rejecting are preventing your child from having an LGBTQ friend, right? Blaming your child because of their sexual orientation or gender, pressuring your child to be more masculine or feminine, letting other folks in the family, in your community, speak badly about them, or telling them that God is going to punish them, right? One of the best things about being raised in the Sikh religion for me was there is absolutely no place in the Guru Granth Sahib that it said LGBTQIA+ was a sin. So yay for that. But when we look at things that families can do to increase health and well-being, right? This is like better health, higher self-esteem, stronger social support, less likely to be depressed, better family relationships. Look at all the good things that you can do. Telling your child that you love them, asking them how you can help them share their identity with others, require that other family members treat your child with respect. And show affection. When I feel like for our community, it's so hard to clue other people into our sexuality because of what's going in society. I feel like we should have a party when we actually do share who we are, and when I say party, that love, that affection, and really standing up for your child. So I'm going to drop this resource in the chat box. There are many different translations of those behaviors, but really quickly before I end, I wanted to buzz through a couple of resilient strategies that you can support with your LGBTQIA+ child. And you can see that in the Queer and Trans Resilience Workbook, we looked at research and we found 11 different strategies. And the very number one resilient strategy for your child to have long life, good self-esteem, is like helping your child, creating an environment where they can define themselves, right? No one else is telling them how they define themselves, but they are, right? Because if the world demands conformity, as a parent, you can help them know that these are microaggressions. These are things you're going to experience out in the world, but I want you to be able to name and validate your feelings when they happen, but be able to act to define yourself, right? I'm just going to identify a couple of more, but this other resilient strategy, the third one, is really helping your child know out in the world when they're not in your home, like how do you identify when those negative messages are happening, right? Because then you can help them build the resilient skill of self-worth. And I love this quote for your child. I hope you're not the one teaching them that they should be giving people discounts, right? We want to support our LGBTQIA+ children and community and knowing their self-worth and knowing how to stand up for themselves. The truth is, the LGBTQI+ community, we've always known how to stand up for ourselves. We have always been here. The key is if families are going to help and really surround their children with love to help them know that who they are and how they are is completely natural and completely valuable. Because when we start giving those messages as family members, then we can see our LGBTQIA+ community grow and thrive, and we can have those very explicit conversations with our children about what do they need to take care of themselves, to grow, to thrive, and how do they surf through those challenges and opportunities. And then we get thriving, right? We get, when you have stress, minority stress that builds up over time, it becomes a crisis. And then that crisis builds up over time and it becomes trauma. When you have family love and acceptance, you help your child move through having to survive in the world, having to be resilient to anti-LGBTQIA+ oppression, to more liberation and freedom. And I'll end with this quote that your role as a parent is to kind of help your child fly, right? And that is about freedom. And if we know there's nothing we can do to control the world, right? Then it's kind of helping our children understand with every breath and every interaction we have with them that the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that their very existence is an act of rebellion. So thank you for listening. I am so excited for the next parts of our session today.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for that great presentation. I was really struck by a couple of the quotes that you used, including this whole piece around self-worth and stop giving out discounts. I don't think that has to be an LGBTQI plus issue necessarily, just to take that to heart. As a father of a young girl myself, I think I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
Let's turn briefly now from the academic and some really good strategies in the research to more of a personal story. And joining us is Shanto Baxi. Shanto has been working in the field of humanitarian aid for more than 20 years, including the fields of education, anti-trafficking, biodiversity, HIV/AIDS, and general health. He joins us from Kolkata in West Bengal. There's also a special guest with him today. I think that's Tessa. I don't have a bio for you, Tessa, because you were a surprise pop-up guest, so you get to do your own. So I'll turn things over to the two of you to share a little bit about your personal experience and story, and then we can all come together afterwards and have a little bit of a conversation.
So then we can start with the person about whom you don't have a bio.
So my name is Tessa Bakshi. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm bisexual. And he kind of got popular because I belong from a sexual minority.
Hi,
So,
Tessa. Thank you for joining us.
So we don't consider ourselves as kind of father and daughter. We consider ourselves as friends, more as partners in crime. So if you are familiar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this is Rocket, I'm Groot. So we use only pop culture references to introduce ourselves and also present our ideas. We are very, very happy to get this opportunity to talk about this issue, which is kind of hidden in India, kind of kept under the closet, kept under the carpet. And we try our best to promote this as an issue of human rights, not only queer rights. So thank you, Nick, and everyone else for the opportunity. That's us.
Great, thank you. I wonder, before we move on to the next portion of the program, if you could just kind of walk through a little bit your story together and how sort of your relationship evolved. And Tessa, again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're willing to share a little bit about sort of your evolution, you know, as a person, and how that relationship with your father played out, and then Dad, how did that relationship with your daughter work?
Yeah, we can start.
So I always had a really great friendship and relationship with my dad, and it was never really some kind of a very strict father and daughter relationship. It was quite frank and very open. So, and I always knew that he was working around people of the queer community, and I knew kind of he was going to accept. And I still kind of struggled for a year and a half before telling him, because it's fine when it's someone else's child, but when it's yours, the reaction can be different. So I waited and I texted him a long 2-3 paragraphs on WhatsApp, and he was like, can you read it for me? It's too long, I don't want to read it. So I was like, no, you have to read it. So after they read that, he was like, okay, cool, you're bisexual. Did you do your homework for tomorrow? And I was like, yeah. Did. Thank you for that absolutely weird reaction.
So okay, so
yeah.
you get
Yeah.
you get a WhatsApp message from Tessa.
I wrote like a 3 or 2 paragraphs, and he was like, it's too long, can you read it for me and like give me a summary? And I was like, no, you need to read it. And
So-
then he read it and he was like, okay, fine, you're cool, did you do the homework? And I was like, yes, I did.
So Dad, well played, first of all. But when you're reading that WhatsApp message, what's going through your head?
Oh, actually, what happened, na? So we are kind of open. So there is no secret. So for last almost 6-7 months, I noticed that she is promoting a lot of advocacy material, lot of information in the social media about the queer people rights. So first, I thought that she will become an activist. She will support the rights of this community. That's why she is kind of advocating on their behalf. So, but when she sent that message and the first line, then I realized, okay, so she was kind of creating ground for her to come out. to the parents so that parents know that she is thinking on that line. So it was never a shock for me. And there is a background for that. I am a person without any formal educational qualification. I'm homeschooled. So when I start looking for job, I got the job in the sex workers cooperative in Kolkata. Their name is Durbar Mohila Samonnoy Committee. So there a lot of marginalized people are working, and the entire spectrum of LGBTQI people were my colleagues. So I have gone through their stories, their struggles. So I was quite aware about the problems that they face. And one of the saddest story that all my friends have shared is that lack of support from their parents. So the first thing, yes, you are the same person to me, no matter what is your sexual preference, is the only sentence they want to hear from their parents, but they are denying that. So that's why I played it so cool. And to be very honest with you, I don't care if Tessa brings back a girl, I have another daughter. If Tessa brings back
Looks
a
like
boy,
maybe your
I have a
video is
son.
frozen for a second. So Dr. Singh, I can bring you in here from.
Nick, we actually hear and see him very well. I think the issue is on your end.
Okay. So that's how it becomes. And
Protect your child, right? And you want the best. And
I think Nick's video is getting stuck.
so
Yeah, should I continue?
Yes, please continue.
Yeah. So then I think Tessa was invited to share her story in one platform. Now you can take on.
Yeah, actually, I kind of commented on a post and they kind of decided, okay, do you want to make a post about yourself and are you comfortable with doing that? I was like, yeah, I don't have a problem. So I did that, and then we were in a live Instagram live, and there we met with this Vika's one of the founding members, Aruna Desai, and after that, Shanto joined that.
So this platform, yes, we exist. They first published her story, and we were quite aware about that how people may react, because people don't kind of understand. Whatever they don't understand, they hate. So me and my wife, we decided the moment she expressed herself in the social media, we are going to openly support her. So we started sharing those posts in our walls, and then we openly telling people that, you know, that our daughter is bisexual and we are so proud of her. And then what happens that a lot of possibility of bullying or so-called social discrimination, we took that out in a proactive manner before it happened. So there was no surprise. Nobody could sort of come and tell us, oh, we came to know that your daughter is bisexual. So that proactive approach, we collectively thought that we will take about this. And I think that really helped her in a way to face, I mean, absolutely zero discrimination.
Yeah, I was not even bullied in my school. It was, it's a very freak accident. I did not got to hear any kind of slurs or discriminations against me, because people kind of knew, because if anybody's gonna do that, I can go and bring my parents and make a proper complaint against them. So it was very easy for me in that way.
Well, and can I share one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's exactly what the research says. It says that, you know, if there's something that the families actually kind of set boundaries about, right? Guardrails, like in leading other family members about how to interact and helping their child know that you're good, you're good, you're good. Oh, you know, it's just that those are the key ingredients for life, for self-esteem, for comfort, and for thriving. So I love your story, and thank you so much for sharing.
And we have a very simple principle. It's 3 of us against the world. So we don't care.
But the truth is you do care, because it's
Yeah.
3 of you, right?
In that way, if whether you accept us or not, it's not a problem.
It's not about the social norms or anything.
Yeah,
So we don't care about that.
We're cool. We're cool. You accept us, very good. You don't accept us, very good. We don't wait for your acceptance.
Well, and I do have a question about, you know, I saw in the Q&A that some people were saying, well, this is unnatural. How do you talk to people about that? I have my response, but I would love to hear if you've had those conversations about where people have said, oh, it's unnatural or it's wrong.
Unnatural. And I don't know what kind of censorship protocol you have. Some people have even say this is anti-God to me.
Yes.
I mean, heterosexual relation, man, woman, a child needs to be produced is what is legal sanction. So, I mean, the way I answer to these people is that I think the queer people are quite sure about their gender identity. I think so-called heterosexuals needs to check, because every time I see Kevin Costner, my heart swings. So I'm not sure that I'm totally heterosexual. So how can I defend something? Kevin Costner makes my heart goes boom, boom. So, so I think it's very natural that your sexual orientation, and it's very personal. So what I say that as a parent, me and Shagota, what we are proud of is that Tessa never felt a reason or a cause to lie to us. That would have been us as failed parents. So Tessa never need to lie, whether she likes a boy, whether she likes a girl, whether she smokes, whether she drinks, whether she watches a movie, whether she bunking class, she never felt the need to lie. So there is no fear in the home. That's the main thing.
Well, I
Other
love that
things, our
answer.
personal life, I'm not worried.
I love that. And my two answers are usually, especially when I'm talking with family members, is where did you learn that? And then usually people pause and they're like, and then they start quoting some religious text that actually isn't there. And I'm like, show it to me. But I think the other piece is, kind of flipping the script and saying, well, when did you first realize you were heterosexual?
Yeah, exactly. Are you even straight or not? Are you sure about that?
What is the definition of straight? I don't know. I mean, we are all human beings. Can't we just simply accept that? I mean, we are all human beings. We have a personal life, which we can discuss, cannot discuss, and there is a professional life.
Yeah.
So I think it's very simple for me.
Well, and I know we have Nick. I know we have Nick back.
I think Nick is facing some problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one more thing about having this conversation is that you might remember the slide where I talked about colonization. I think that is the other piece of it.
Came over today, upgraded my speed.
Yeah, it's in India. It's in the land we now call the United States of America. It's in every single country that's had colonization. That's where we see the really anti-LGBTQIA plus sentiment. And so, I think that's a hard conversation in India, in the United States, because it happened so many generations ago and we forget. And so I think some of these conversations are ongoing, right? You ask, when did you first realize you were straight? Wait, where did you learn that LGBTQIA plus people were bad? And then sometimes it's boundaries, like, please do not say this to my child. You will not say this to my child, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have the right. I don't go and sort of invade your privacy. I don't ask questions about your orientation, your personal life. So who gives you the right to ask questions about my child? Respect. Respect and get respect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe Nick is back. Hey, Nick.
Hi, friends. I apologize. Airtel actually came over today to upgrade my internet speed, and that doesn't seem to have gone right.
Usually it has a reverse effect.
Anyway. So look, I'd like us actually to move if we can, because I want to be cognizant of time to get to Q&A. We have a couple of videos from some people who have a similar experience. I'd love to watch those and get your reaction from them. Can we play video number 1?
I just uttered one sentence that I am not your son. I don't identify myself as a boy. And it was very hard for my mom to hear that thing, because she raised me as a son for 18 years. But my mom told me just one thing. when I was doing my engineering and she knew that I am doing it out of family pressure, she told me that what you are as a person, you don't choose that, but you can choose your career. So if you don't want to do engineering, just leave it. That was a turning point in my life when I didn't have to look back again.
Okay, what do we think? Let's talk with you. Let's start with you, Dr. Singh.
Oh, I got chills. My heart just expanded seeing that, because those are the stories that LGBTQ children remember when they're out in the world. And so we need to make sure our children have that visceral, deep understanding of permission, of acceptance, of validation, because we can't protect them once they're out in the world. And that person had that. They had that direct message, and it helped them transform their life.
I mean, these are happy memories. I mean, this gives you courage to fight. These are needed. More such stories are needed out in the open.
Yeah, but it's hard sometimes, I think, to find people to share the story, right? I mean, it's about opening yourself up and being willing to tell people some pretty intimate type of thing. I mean, how do you encourage someone to do that?
I mean, I don't encourage anyone to do that, but if you are doing that, then you should be doing it happily, without any pressure, and ready for the consequences. That world may give you some backlash. But if you are mentally prepared, then the backlash is nothing. I mean, you can face that. But don't sell these stories for any other purpose, where then you will regret. That's what I will say.
I agree with that, Mr. Buxy. It's not about forcing people to come out, right? But it's about saying, you know what, you get to choose. You know who you are, and I see you and I love you. And I know what you're going to experience in the world. So there is a lot of discrimination. So you get to choose the time, the place, how. And I love what you said, Mr. Buxy, about, that you're happy about it, right? Tessa, I'd love to hear what you think about this question too.
Oh, what I think about it, I think parent support is very needed, because in the world we are always we are always depending on the support of our parents, because when it's normal crises, we go to them and they'll be like, yeah, you'll be fine. You need to do this, this, this. But whenever it comes to this kind of consequences, and they're like, we don't know, and we don't want to be associated with you and everything, and they just step back and they just leave you standing there because you don't have the support system that you had 5 minutes ago. So I actually want parents to be there, even if you don't understand it properly. Try to understand it. It's your child. You give birth to them. You raise them. They cannot be wrong, or they cannot be unnatural. They cannot be unlovable.
Oh, my heart breaks hearing that. You cannot be unlovable. Again, as a parent, I just think through some of these things, and obviously you want your the best for a child, and I think this sort of gets to the heart of the issue, right? And we've had a number of questions in the chat that go along these lines. When you hear from your child that I'm transgender, or I'm bisexual, or something, right, an alternative sexuality, I think a lot of people's first reaction is, oh man, that's going to be really hard, right?
Yeah.
That the world is a hard place to begin with, and you're adding on another layer of complication. And I believe that most parents want what's best for their kids, and they want good things to happen to them. And I wonder what's your reaction, especially you, Mr. Bakshi, to that sort of sense of, wow, this unveiling, this revelation is going to make things harder on you. And I don't want life to be harder on you as a child.
Yeah, but most of the time, I think the parents that were found it difficult to support their children, on that moment, actually, they were thinking about themselves, their world, their social prestige, not thinking about the child. So here you have to understand that you are kind of responsible for this person. And this person is in a very vulnerable situation. So you can shift the focus from you and put it on the child, and your problems can come later. So first, wholeheartedly, unconditionally support your child, and then plan the way you can, the way you find it easy. I have seen many parents who support their children and say that, okay, inside the home, it's all right. We know your sexual identity, orientation, we support, don't go out and say. Nothing wrong in that. I mean, everybody doesn't want to stand on the rooftop and shout. I mean, there is no compulsion. You don't have to come out to the world. But the first thing within the family should accept is in the first. That's what I will say.
Well, and the research actually shows the opposite, right? That when family members, as Mr. Boxey is saying, aren't accepting, that's when you see the world get harder for your children. It's when the depression, the suicidality, the drug use, HIV risk, STI risk goes up. So if you want your child to live, you talk to them about what that world's going to be like, and you talk about your fears in a way that you don't shut them down.
Thank you for that, Dr. Singh. And Mr. Boxey, this is a pretty cold message, but it's pretty perceptive that as a parent, when you say, I don't want life to be hard for you, are you really saying, I don't want to have to go and have this conversation with my brothers and cousins and my parents and
That's most of the parents in India and all over the world, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's not like there are very few families like ours where my dad is actually doing more advocacy than me about my sexual orientation. That's very rare in the whole world. I can say that right now. Yeah.
And see the result. I'm famous. I'm in the talk show.
Yeah, I accept you, but I can't tell uncle because it's just going to be a thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. There are a lot of my friends who are there. They're like, yeah, my parents are fine, but they will not tell the family members. So because the relations will be destroyed and they will not be able to visit their houses and the whole drama gonna come along.
So Dr. Singh, it sounds like a pretty blunt message though for parents who are in that mindset, right? That you're at a that you've got to do the right thing.
Well, we know from the research what happens when they don't. But the other thing that I've learned, because I do a lot of counseling and psychology work with South Asian immigrants in the US around these issues, and parents often will say and have this deep feeling in India, but also in the US, that my child was perfect as they were born. But there are assumptions about how they were born, right? And so I think just there is something really important that parents can do to open up a space where they can grieve, and it makes sure that grief isn't a burden on your child, but that, oh my gosh, when you start to look at it, you start to realize I've learned really harmful things and this is scary. I don't know where to go. And the thing I want to say in general, I've seen it in the Q&A box too, about kind of the urgency about how we change people. Let's move away from that, because I think that our specific role is to support the LGBTQIA+ people who are there and to deliver the message that their lives are valuable. LGBTQIA+ people, we're going to build our chosen families. We're going to build our thriving networks, right? We're not confused that discrimination is here. And what we need is the allies talking with one another, not forcing each other, but having that conversation and evolving that conversation. And I think, Tessa, you wanted to share something?
Oh, I just want to say that this kind, the one that Dad said, some people who are fine when it's in the house, but they are not ready to talk about out in the open, the parents I'm talking about. I think that kind of support is actually worse than getting no support at all. At least you know where you stand when you have no support. I don't have any support from my family. I am on my own. I'll do something. But this isn't the halfway, and you're not sure if they actually support you or not. And it's a very, I don't know, confusing situation for the child also. So they support me, but they don't support me. And it just puts a lot of mental trauma and stress.
Also, you have to understand the kind of social stigma and the pressure this child, a teenager may be going through. That person is realizing that so-called quote unquote what is accepted as normal, he or she is not part of that. On top of that, if the family is not sure to support or not at all supporting, the job only becomes more difficult for that person. So as I always say that as a parent, you must remember that just before that coming out statement and after the coming out statement, it's the same child. Nothing has changed for that child.
Boy, pretty cool dad. Let's right. Let's take a moment now. Let's watch. We have 2 more video clips. I want to get to another one of them now and get your reaction. Let's play the next video clip.
My mother was very supportive. She was also very concerned because, at that time my health had really deteriorated under the kind of public pressure, that I was feeling. So she recommended that, I should probably go to a counselor. At that moment, when I came out to her, I had come out to her as, having attractions to both girls and boys. So therefore, she felt that, I need to talk to a counselor and probably this is a phase and a counselor would help. And this is the time that I sort of came out to my father. And my father was the most important person for me to come out and the person I was most scared of telling. But when I did tell him, it was quite nice because he told me that, he really loves me and he's very proud of me. He would even come to a pride walk with me. So this gave me more support to sort of come out more publicly.
Boy, and another pretty cool dad. But within that, at the beginning, I want to take us back to this idea of counseling, right? Maybe that's a reaction from a parent right away that, oh, well, maybe some sort of counseling. This is like, and forgive me, but I'm just sort of thinking through the mental process, right? This is some kind of side effect of depression, or this is related to something else, or maybe it's a mental health issue. And so how do you sort of work beyond that? Maybe Dr. Singh, you're the right person to start with that.
Yeah, sure. I put in the chat box the link to the Family Acceptance Project, so you can see the posters in different languages. But we just know that, it's often called conversion when people are sent to counseling to change who they are. We have piles of research that says that those conversion efforts not only fail, they actually escalate and increase suicidality. And so I do think it's hard to access counseling that's affirming. I do think we're getting there in India and the US, we're getting stronger resources. But sometimes I kind of like that first reaction from a parent that's like, let's get you some support. I think what I would have wanted to add is, that conversation, like knowing how the mom and dad worked through that, right? Because that's a conversation that needs to happen away from the child so they can show up and be their best supportive selves for them. Mr. Buxey, what do you think? Tessa?
Yeah, Tessa.
No, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes what happens, the counseling, this term, I don't know about US, but in India, it will automatically put you in the category of a person with a disease. It's not a disease. I mean, you're not going through a depression or you're not going through an addiction phase where you need a counselor. So what Dr. Singh said, that at the back of the mind, the conversion theory therapy is there, that something is wrong happening with my child's understanding, or maybe this is a phase. So a counselor will talk and help my child to come out of it. So it's not a disease, it's not a mental phase, it's a kind of a natural thing which we need to understand. So our children don't need counselor. That's all. I mean, we need to educate ourselves, and these days it's very easy. God bless Google.
Yeah, right on. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and we're going to get to those in just a moment, but I do want to play this last video because, as I recall, this sort of comes back to our key point about parents not wanting a hard life for their kids. What does that really mean? Let's watch the next video.
So it was a huge challenge for me, and I was continuously at conflict with myself. But fortunately, I had a mother who I consider as one of the most well-read and one of the most evolved mothers. And we come from a very middle-class background. And I remember I was around 22 years old. At that point of time, I was in a relationship with a guy and things were not going well. So one day my mother asked me, that what does this guy mean to you? And I told her that, like, he is the bestest friend that I have ever had. So my mother looked at me, she held my face and she said, if he is your best friend, it's okay. But if he means little more than that to you, better, then let me tell you one thing, life is going to be very tough. I broke down. My mother just held me. And after that, we never had any conversation around this subject. Because my father always thought that here was this promiscuous guy. He's just sleeping around with women. He doesn't want to accept responsibility and get married. But once he came to know that I'm gay, things changed. He started talking. And my father is someone like, who defines what masculinity is. And he once told me that, it takes, I would never even read anything about LGBT issues. But now when I know that my son is gay, I try to read as much as possible. I try to understand as much as possible because it's my son involved.
Well, I love all the pictures of people sharing. Same thing with you, Dr. Singh. I appreciate it in your presentation, sharing your own personal pictures. But you noticed in there that his mom grabbed him by the face and said, life is going to be very hard, right? And that takes us back to what we were saying before. Mr. Boxy and Tessa, I'll start with you two. What's your reaction to that video?
I love the fact the father was willing to know the subject and what is happening around the queer culture, even though he didn't know, and he was super masculine and whatever that means, and so-called macho man in Indian society, and he was willing to do that for his child, and that's what we need every day. You need to know what is happening in your child's life so they can be secure and safe. One of the I would say I never got into trouble in any in life because my parents always knew what I was doing, where I was, because I didn't have to hide from them, didn't have to lie for them. But a lot of my friends got in a lot of troubles because they could not tell their parents what they're doing, who they were with, and it got messy and there were consequences, obviously. But if you are open with your child, these things can be minimized, and it can be very few things that can be happen to which are not in your hand. But if you tell your parents and your parents are open about it, you can be controlling these kind of things that will happen that are beyond your control.
I mean, there can be possibilities of hardship, there can be possibilities of discrimination and bully, but if you're aware of it and if you're willingly doing that as a person, queer person, then all we parents can do is stand by you as long as we live. I think that's the best we can do. And we cannot promise you a better world, but we can at least promise you a better family.
Boy, Dr. Singh, and I think Tessa and Mr. Boxy just on exactly what you brought up in your presentation at the very beginning here about these sort of negative consequences of doing nothing or denying it or not being comfortable talking about it, right? Tessa just brought up all the things, getting in trouble, addiction, all the rest of it, that by not addressing it, you're doing yourself a disservice, right?
Yes, Tessa had the family that allowed her to not do all the things that I did. So
I do them, but they know about it, and that's why I am not getting in trouble. And like, if you want to drink and do that kind of, do it at home. Don't go to bars and get in trouble.
Yeah, I was doing that to have a community away from them. But I think that story, the thing that really struck me was that the parents read, reading everything you can get. And it relates to the question in the chat box about educating others, educating school systems. In the state, when I lived in the state of Georgia in the US, we started the Georgia Safe Schools Coalition. And so we had a pretty extensive group of trainers that everyone volunteered, but we had school counselors who could talk to school counselors. We had teachers who could talk to teachers. We had principals, leaders of the schools who could talk to school leaders, family members, moms, dads, grandparents that could talk to grandparents and other family members. And so I think it can feel like all hope is lost in those situations, but I really encourage people to channel that hopelessness into energy, that fear and anxiety into energy and advocacy. you're not going to be able to change the world, but you will be able to change your part of the world. And I think that's what Mr. Buxey was saying. Like, I can promise you a good and supportive family. And what a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Did we lose Nick again? If we did, maybe, I know he was probably going to wrap us up. And as we do wrap up, Tessa and Mr. Buxey, I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for just your light, your lives, your stories, being so vulnerable and open, but teaching us. You've taught us so much in a short amount of time. And deep gratitude and a deep bow to you as well.
Thank you.
Dr. Singh,
We're
this is
honored.
you. I'm not sure if Nick is back with us yet. But we were going to actually go do some audience questions if you have time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we've got quite a few. So I'm going to take one from Dr. Julie Mehta. In a nation like India, the stigma is so strong against diversity, more so than ever before, that parents are scared of being ostracized if their children are seen to be sexually different. How do you implement safety and affirmation to parents to make it okay for sexually differently oriented children?
Dr. Singh?
I think that's the tension, right? I think sometimes we want to force other people to be okay with things, right? And it's kind of like a quick fix we're looking for. And this isn't a quick fix. If you think about that, the roots of discrimination against LGBTQIA plus communities is in colonization, right? We've got a few generations to go in this work. And so you want to keep your work very generationally focused and about opening the conversation. You know, those two questions, where did you learn that being LGBTQIA plus was wrong? And listening, not debating, listening, right? Now, I don't want LGBTQIA plus community members. This isn't our work. This is the work of people who are not to do this work with themselves. We did not create unsafe environments for ourselves. Cisgender and straight people created those environments, specifically under colonization. And so I know it feels really big, but I want us to encourage to think about that one family conversation, that one conversation with a principal, a leader of a school, that one conversation with a teacher, that one conversation with a religious leader. And Mr. Buxey, Tessa, any thoughts?
I will say that same thing, but maybe in a different, I think you cannot control the world that whether they will misbehave with your child or not. But if the world is misbehaving with your child, don't be silent. Be vocal about it, bring it in a public platform, discuss about it. So most of the time, these people are very scared people who are trying to bully your child. So the moment you bring this issue to daylight, like vampires, they vanish. So it's the fear of your inside that your child is not normal is on which they are preying. So the moment you accept it and you bring the subject in daylight and discuss with them in an open platform, they will run away, most of them.
So this actually is a good spot to lead us back to our next question here.
Oh no, we may have lost Nick again. Let me choose a question. I don't know which one he was about to mention, so I'm going to ask one from Sneha Gupta. Can a family be blamed entirely for not accepting an LGBT child, given the pressures of society?
I mean, it's not in that kind of black and white. There are multiple shades of gray. I mean, there are no easy yes or no answers. I mean, you also grow with the subject, you understand your child, and take your time and select a moment where you decide to support this or bring this into light, as I said. So there is no ready formula that 2 + 2 and this will happen. So that will be my answer. Nobody needs to blame anybody. Nobody needs to feel guilty. But please try to understand the subject understand the problem of the child in your house and keeping the child in center or in priority, and then discuss among yourself that what best you can do to address this issue. There is no fixed result or solution to it. There is no quick fix.
I love that answer, Mr. Buxley, and I do love this question and all the questions that have been asked. For this particular one, I think the most important thing is that that curiosity is such an important muscle to build, right? We did not get to where we are in India or the United States overnight. It's been hundreds of years post-colonization in the making. And so at the same time, we also need to understand, just like LGBTQIA plus children go through their own kind of, I like to call it a cluing in process. This, I'm learning who I am. Tessa was talking about what that was like for her. Families have their own cluing in processes. And sometimes the children can get really impatient with the families, and it makes sense. I'm not saying that's incorrect. I'm just saying that it can be helpful to talk with the children and the families around. You might be at different pieces. So by the time children have shared who they are, the families are trying to catch up. And so as Mr. Buxley was saying, there are those stages of grief. And when we think about the stages of grief, the first stage is shock, denial. And then you see all the icky stuff, yucky stuff happening around, like, oh, you're not who you are, right? When you're in that stage of shock, families, keep those thoughts to yourself, share with someone else, not with your child, right? Then moving from shock into denial, bargaining. Well, maybe Tessa's saying she's bisexual, but maybe it's just a phase, right? Bargaining is where it can be a roller coaster ride for children, because they're like, I feel accepted, I don't feel accepted. I feel supported, I don't feel supported. And then family members do go through intense anger and sadness before they get to acceptance. And so the best thing that families can do is do that work with other people who are not LGBTQI plus. So they have their space to like scream, to yell, to grieve, to cry, to grieve the life they thought their child was going to have. And we know in India and the United States, these things have huge implications. Like, we think like, okay, well, we're lost if our child isn't straight, if they aren't getting married, if they aren't producing children, all the stuff we start kind of anticipating. So I know that's a longer answer, but I wanted to pull out those stages of grief so we could just name them. And parents, do that grieving with people who are not your children.
Very interesting. Okay. I love that you always connected to your experience in the United States, because the truth is the United States is quite a conservative society too, and not everyone knows that.
Yes. Well, there's often this myth in the United States. It's like, well, we're so advanced from other countries. We're better at women. And we look at what we do to women. We look at what we do to transgender people. We look at what we do to LGBTQI plus people. And we have brutal, horrible numbers of what we do. And so we are in a learning process too. And all of that goes back to Western European colonization of the land that we now call the United States, because the indigenous Native American nations and tribes that were here, they did have people of many genders, of many sexualities, right? They weren't called queer or trans or the words we use today, but they existed. Part of the project of colonization is erasing a culture's spiritual fabric. And often our communities were a part of that spiritual fabric. You see that with the Hijra in India. They had very different status pre-British colonization, just like in the US, pre-Western European colonization. So that's mind-blowing when you start to think about it. And so that's part of the education we need to do.
Thank you. We don't have a whole lot of time left. We've got about 5 minutes. I want to ask one question with maybe societal implications. This one's from Anupama Eswaran. Schools in India are reluctant to have conversations on gender, sex, and sexuality. Schools are a hotbed for bullying, and many times teachers are also insensitive. Schools, along with parents, can make a difference. How can we convince schools to see the need to address this issue?
Okay, so I can say it from my perspective is that sometimes if you wait for a social change, enlightenment of an entire generation and acceptance and tolerance, that sometimes doesn't happen. So sometimes we need laws to protect people's rights. So we need better laws and harsher punishment against human rights violations. So we don't need to highlight it as queer rights. We need to highlight as human rights. And any kind of violation and discrimination needs much harsher penalty, and public examples should be created about respecting people's lives. Because socially, people are getting educated, it will take time. And I don't have the knowledge to comment how long people will take to tolerate their neighbors. Dr. Singh.
You're muted. I love that answer, Anupama, and I did put in the chat box. It's going to look different for your communities, right? Georgia looks different from other states in the United States. We have pretty intense discrimination. And so I talked about that tiered model we used, which was an education and advocacy model. And so I think it's requesting meetings with the leaders of the schools, the teachers, don't feel like you have to transform the whole school, because it doesn't, that's a generational thing, right? But when we don't, what I've noticed is that our straight and cisgender allies and advocates sometimes don't even take that first step. And it becomes almost fatalistic, like, well, I'm going to support my child inside the house, but it's like, don't ask, don't tell. We need ask and do tell from parents. Like, this is my beloved child. How will they be treated this year in the school system? I want to know. Be quiet, listen to their answer, and then let them tell you what they're going to do. And then when the absence of strategies is there, refer them to the resources and tell them the expectations. I know many of the things we've talked about today, I don't want to make them seem glib or easy or just everyone can do them. But I do think I want to encourage family members to move out of complacence. The first step to move out of complacence is with your child. And then the second step is with the rest of the world, right? Not all at once, but one step at a time. And for family members, it goes back to the grief process. You didn't realize this is going to be the rest of your life. But I promise you, whether you believe in one lifetime or many, this life, you're going to make a good one for your child. And that's the thing you're going to remember when you take your last breath on this earth, is that relationship you've developed with your child. We only have a certain amount of breaths in this lifetime we'll take. And I really hope that they're deeply connected and supported with, as what Mr. Buxley said, human rights.
And what a beautiful note to end on. I think we've come up upon our end time. I just want to share one personal observation or comment. So as a new parent myself, I have a boy who is not even 1 year old yet.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But this session has really given me, because I figured, I'll deal with this kind of stuff later, so on and so forth. But it's really given me a lot of food for thought, and not just with sexual orientation or anything else, just how important the parent's role is in giving that individual, that child, that safe place that they can come back to and ground themselves in. And I'm really going to take that away from this discussion today. And a huge thanks to Mr. Bakshi, to Tessa, and Dr. Singh. Really appreciate it. It's been a fantastic session. And to the audience, again, thank you for joining. This is a series, and we've done quite a few programs already, and we'll continue to do them. So please, if you want to learn more, follow us on Facebook, and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. And just a quick note, there will be a survey popping up on the screen for those who have followed. And we encourage you to complete that survey, and we very much appreciate you doing so. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.